Off the coast of Hispaniola sits a small island that was once the most dangerous place on Earth. Not dangerous the way wars are dangerous, or famines, or plagues. Dangerous the way freedom is dangerous when the wrong people find it. For nearly 50 years, this island was home to thousands of pirates, outlaws, escaped slaves, and deserters who built an entire civilization from nothing. And the civilization they built was, in several measurable ways, more democratic than the empires that were trying to destroy it. The island was shaped like a turtle. The Spanish called it La Tortuga. And what happened there between 1630 and 1680 has been buried so thoroughly under Hollywood mythology that most people have no idea the real story is stranger, more complicated, and more relevant than anything a screenwriter invented. This is the real story of Tortuga. To understand Tortuga, you have to understand what the Caribbean looked like before the pirates arrived. It is the early 1600s. Spain controls almost everything. After Columbus sailed west in 1492, the Spanish crown claimed the Caribbean as its personal treasury. They built colonies on Hispaniola, Cuba, and Puerto Rico. They enslaved indigenous populations. They shipped gold, silver, tobacco, and sugar back to Europe by the ton. The Caribbean was not an adventure. It was a factory. And Spain had no intention of sharing it with anyone. But England, France, and the Netherlands were watching Spain get rich, and they wanted a piece of it. The problem was that Spain had forts, warships, and the blessing of the Pope himself, who had divided the New World between Spain and Portugal in 1494. Anyone else who showed up was technically an intruder. In practice, anyone else who showed up was a target. So the French showed up anyway. French hunters and traders began settling the western coast of Hispaniola in the early 1600s. These men were not soldiers or noblemen. They were drifters, escaped servants, and men with nothing left to lose in Europe. They hunted wild cattle and pigs that the Spanish had originally brought to the island and abandoned. They smoked the meat over open fires called boucans. In French, a man who uses a boucan is a boucanier. In English, we call them buccaneers. These were the original residents of what would become the pirate world. And they were not, at first, pirates at all. They were just trying to survive. The Spanish noticed them eventually, and the Spanish did what they always did. They sent soldiers. They burned the settlements. They slaughtered the cattle the buccaneers depended on for food. The French survivors fled across a narrow channel to a small mountainous island just off the northwest coast of Hispaniola. The island was about 25 miles long and 5 miles wide. It had one natural harbor, dense jungle covering its peaks, and cliffs on its northern coast that made any naval assault nearly impossible. It was, in almost every way, the perfect hideout. The buccaneers settled in. More outcasts followed. Men who had deserted from European navies, escaped indentured servants, freed and escaped enslaved people, petty criminals who had exhausted every other option. Tortuga became a collection point for the unwanted people of the Atlantic world. And here is where things start to get genuinely interesting. Because these men, with no government, no military authority, no law, and no one telling them what to do, did not descend into pure chaos. They built something. It was rough and violent, but it was a functioning society. The first governing principle of Tortuga was simple. If you were here, you were one of us. It did not matter where you came from, what language you spoke, or what you had done before you arrived. The island absorbed all comers. French buccaneers lived alongside English sailors, Dutch traders, and men whose origins no one bothered to ask about. A crude economy developed. Meat for ship supplies for weapons, weapons for protection, and behind all of it, always the rum. The Spanish did not ignore Tortuga forever. In 1629, they launched a major assault, drove out the settlers, and occupied the island with a small garrison. For a moment, it seemed like the experiment was over. But the buccaneers came back. They always came back. In 1638, a man named Jean Levasseur arrived with orders from France to take and hold the island. Levasseur changed everything. He was not a pirate. He was a builder. He looked at the rocky promontory above the harbor, and he cut a fort out of the cliff itself. He positioned cannon to cover every possible approach from the sea. He called it La Montagne, the mountain, and from its walls he could look down on any ship entering the harbor. Then he made himself governor. He was not appointed by France in any official capacity. He simply announced he was in charge, and the buccaneers decided that a man who had just built them an impenetrable fort probably deserved some authority. Under Levasseur, Tortuga became an economy. Pirates who used the harbor paid a percentage of their plunder to the fort's administration. In return, they got a safe harbor, access to supplies, and protection. He lasted 12 years before two of his own lieutenants stabbed him to death over a dispute he refused to resolve. This was very much in keeping with the spirit of Tortuga. The most important figure in the island's history arrived next, a French colonial administrator named Bertrand d'Ogeron. He was pragmatic in a way most colonial administrators were not. He understood that Tortuga's power came not from France, but from the pirates themselves. So instead of trying to suppress them, d'Ogeron worked with them. He formalized what Levasseur had started. Pirates who operated out of Tortuga paid a percentage of their captures to the island's administration. In return, they received everything a pirate needed: harbor, supplies, and a place to sell their plunder without asking inconvenient questions. Under d'Ogeron, Tortuga reached its peak. What was daily life actually like on Tortuga? At its height in the 1660s and 1670s, the island held a population of somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 people. Small by any measure, but its influence was enormous because every pirate ship moving through the Western Caribbean eventually passed through its harbor. The main settlement along the southern shore had no town planning. Buildings went up where people decided to put them. Taverns, storehouses, repair yards, and homes mixed together in a way that would have horrified any European urban planner. The streets turned to mud when it rained and baked hard when it did not. The taverns were the center of social life. Rum was everywhere and cheap. A successful pirate returning from a raid might spend an entire fortune in a matter of weeks. This was expected. The culture of Tortuga was explicitly anti-accumulation. You came back from a voyage, you spent what you earned, and then you went out again. And then there were the articles. Before any voyage, the captain and crew of a pirate ship would sign what they called articles, contracts specifying the captain's authority, the share of plunder each crew member would receive, and the compensation that injured pirates would get for specific wounds. A lost eye, 100 pieces of 8. A lost hand, 200. A lost leg, 500. These were not suggestions, they were binding agreements, witnessed and signed, enforceable by the community. Compare this to the British Royal Navy in the same era, where a common sailor who lost his leg in battle received nothing and was left to beg on the streets of London. The pirates of Tortuga had a workers' compensation system a century before most European nations had labor law. The captains of pirate ships were elected, not appointed, elected. A captain who abused his crew could be voted out and replaced. The quartermaster, not the captain, controlled the distribution of plunder, specifically to prevent any single person from taking more than their documented share. These were not the structures of chaos. These were the structures of a society that had thought very carefully about power and what happened when it was concentrated in the wrong hands. There was also a concept called matelotage, a formal partnership between two men, legally recognized within the community, that granted shared property rights, mutual obligations of care, and inheritance rights if one of them died. The institution was real, practiced widely on Tortuga, and recognized by the community as binding. In a world where rank and birth determined everything, here was a small island where men were choosing their own leaders, writing their own contracts, and creating recognized forms of partnership. It was also brutal and exploitative. The same pirates who voted on their articles were enslaving people they captured. There is no clean version of this history, but the tension within it, between the internal democracy and the external brutality, is part of what makes Tortuga so strange and so worth understanding. Every lawless world eventually attracts a law. The turning point came in 1670 with the Treaty of Madrid, signed between England and Spain. England agreed to stop issuing letters of marque to privateers attacking Spanish ships. Spain agreed to recognize English possession of Jamaica. The deal was diplomatic, and it was also a direct attack on the economic model that Tortuga ran on. In Jamaica, new governors began enforcing anti-piracy laws with real consequences. Pirate captains who had once been welcome in Port Royal were now being hanged there. The message was clear. The Crown's tolerance was finished. Tortuga itself was brought increasingly under formal French control. The buccaneers who remained began drifting east. The harbor was still used, but less and less by pirates. The final blow came from economics as much as politics. Spain had stripped much of the easily accessible gold and silver from the Americas. The treasure fleets were smaller and better protected. The easy targets were gone. By 1700, Tortuga was no longer the center of anything. The history of Tortuga after the Golden Age is largely a history of forgetting. The French consolidated the western third of Hispaniola into the colony of Saint-Domingue. It became the most profitable colony in the world, producing coffee, sugar, and cotton through the labor of hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans. In 1791, Saint-Domingue became the site of the only successful slave revolution in history. The Haitian Revolution lasted 13 years and ended with the proclamation of the Republic of Haiti in 1804. Tortuga itself became part of Haiti after independence. Today it is called Île de la Tortue. It has a population of around 25,000 people. It is one of the poorest parts of one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. The fort that Levasseur built is mostly ruins. The harbor that once sheltered hundreds of pirate ships now shelters fishing boats. But here is the thing that the Hollywood version never gets right. The Brethren of the Coast were writing their articles and electing their captains in the 1650s and 1660s. John Locke published his foundational work on government by consent in 1689. The American Declaration of Independence came in 1776. The French Revolution in 1789. None of those events were caused by pirates, but they were all asking the same fundamental question that the men of Tortuga had already answered, badly and violently and decades earlier. Can people govern themselves? The buccaneers of Tortuga said yes. They said it with documents. They said it with elections. They said it with contracts that a lost eye was worth 100 pieces of 8, and a captain who violated his articles could be removed by a vote. They were not philosophers. They were trying to survive, to profit, and to escape the systems that had failed them. But in the process, they ran an experiment. They created a community based on voluntary contracts, elected leadership, and shared stakes in collective enterprises. The experiment had enormous flaws. It was built on violence toward outsiders. It existed within and often depended on the larger slave economy of the Caribbean. But within those limits, it demonstrated something real. People with no institutional support and no inherited authority could create functional governance. They could write rules and follow them. They could distribute power rather than concentrate it. That is not nothing. The island sits there today, quiet and largely forgotten, holding a story more complicated and more interesting than anything Hollywood has put on screen. A story about what happens when the people the world throws away decide to build something of their own. What they build is not clean. It contains the same cruelties and contradictions that the world they fled contained. But it is theirs. And for about 50 years on a turtle-shaped rock in the Caribbean, it worked. Tortuga was never just an island. It was a dare. A group of cast-offs looked at the rules of the world and decided to write their own. They elected their captains, split their plunder equally, and built a hidden civilization on rum, gunpowder, and sheer audacity. The empire they raised was violent and brief. But for 50 years, on that small rock in the Caribbean, the unwanted men of the Atlantic world proved that even outlaws can build something worth remembering.